Hello, UK Crime Book Club. I'm having a lovely chat with Pam, Pam Lecky, and we've just kind of lost track of time for a minute. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be
Thank you
here.
for joining us. Would you like to tell everybody a little bit about Under a Lightning Sky? Show off that gorgeous cover.
Okay, so here it is.
Mm.
Hopefully everybody can see.
It is a beauty, isn't it? It
Yeah,
really
no,
is.
very, very happy with that cover. Yeah, it was lovely. Um, yeah, this is the fourth book I've written for Avon, and it's a standalone at the moment, possibly the first in a new series for me. We're just waiting to see how it chips along.
I would very much like this to be the first in a new series.
Yeah, hopefully. So yeah, and it was funny. This book kind of came about when I was researching my Her Secret War, which is a trilogy of kind of espionage thrillers, and I discovered this really, really good book, and all it was all about crime during World War II on the home front, and there was a particular murder that caught my attention, and the killer had used the Blitz to hide their crime. So that was kind of the premise for this book. Now it's not a retelling of that at all, but it's using a similar kind of instrument, I suppose, to kind of kick it off. So the book's it's Christmas 1940, and the Blitz is well underway, and Madeline Fairfax is discovered in the ruins of her house. And what seems initially to be an accidental death due to the bombing, it's discovered that it's in fact a murder, and that the criminal had hoped that their crime would be hidden, but a pathologist just makes a discovery, and so you'd have to read the book to find it. So that's really the premise of it. So my detective is Jamie Barton, and his sergeant is Bill Lyle. And I had great fun writing them. I think they're a nice little duo, and I'm kind of hoping that that relationship will be enjoyable for readers. It's not just the crime and solving it; it's also their story as well. So that's it.
Lovely. We'll come to your other books as well at some point, but for now, as crimes of opportunity go, I mean, it's so mean and brutal. It's brilliant. It's so good. you know, um, I know you're going to do a reading for us in a few minutes,
Well,
but is the reading from the first chapter?
it is, yeah.
Right, so we'll leave that for the reading then. But it's the most brilliant thing. I mean, obviously, you're reading it and your heart goes out to Madeline because you know she's in the Blitz and they're used to the bombs maybe going a bit further away than they are, and she's making this Christmas pudding and looking forward to her son's coming home. And she's not really the biggest fan of her husband, but a lot of marriages were maybe not based on love at the time. Not
Yeah,
as many as there should have been. All of them should
yeah.
be, but um, and somebody comes to help her when her house is bombed, but not quite. They don't really help.
That
So
really
as a
helped her.
crime of opportunity,
Yes, I think they helped her on her way to heaven as opposed to anything else. Yeah.
and honestly, it's the most brilliant opening chapter. But at the same time, it's so you're just kind of watching her go about a day, and she's just kind of thinking away as we all do. We'll all be doing something and thinking about something else, and she's quite happily thinking about the things she's looking forward to, the things that she'd like to avoid maybe in some way. So she's thinking about all of these things, and we really grow to like her, and then she's gone.
And then she's gone. And
And then
then
she's gone.
as the book unfolds, kind of her secrets start to kind of spill out as well. So she's not the innocent mom that she appears to be, really. She has her secrets, and yeah, it makes it more difficult for my poor detectives to kind of unravel it all.
It does. And one of the things that we were talking about is that, as you know, for the police procedural side of the book, you have not given yourself any kind of easy way of doing this at all. You have got the police who are already, you know, kind of underfunded back then, and they've not got the technology that we had now.
Mm.
And then you have them trying to solve the crime during the Blitz.
Yep.
You did not make this easy for yourself, Pam.
No, I suppose not. But yeah, and it did worry me that, how am I going to get the procedures right? But I suppose on my side was the fact that they were under-resourced financially and personnel-wise.
Mm.
They were left with a lot of retired policemen had to come back to work, or they had very young recruits who had no experience. So those detectives who did stay that had a bit of experience were really overstretched. So,
Yeah.
I felt I was safe enough having them running around doing everything because, obviously resources were so scarce.
Mm.
And then as I researched, I was trying to read contemporary crime novels as well. So that kind of gave me a bit of a feel for how policemen investigated crimes at the time. And, even simple things like the police phone box on the street, that kind of stuff that I actually hadn't even been aware of. But, as I read contemporary novels written at the time, that became, it's like, oh, I can add that. I can include those kind of little things. So yeah, it was a challenge. And I suppose I was a little worried, but then I kind of thought to myself, I researched as much as I could. A reader, if I can't find these things written in stone somewhere, then the reader probably is happy enough to accept my interpretation. So
Yeah.
that's how I handled it, So other than going to a police historian, which wasn't really in the timeline I had to work in, just wasn't feasible. So that was it. So
You read a lot of different books. You didn't just read crime, you read other things as well while you were researching. Is that right?
yeah, well, I love the research, and that's probably why I've always kind of veered towards historical as opposed to contemporary. So yeah, I mean, I've a library of stuff here behind me. I just love the research. And I suppose, yeah, it's for me, I can't really get into my characters' heads until I know what their lives would have been. So
Yeah.
that entails, and I mean, it's not about dumping all that information on the reader, but I think you cannot write authentic characters unless you know what their lives were like, or as close as you can get to it.
Leslie's commented that, hi Leslie, that you're a new author for her. Sounds right up her street. I was actually thinking of Leslie and I was going to message her after this tonight because the pacing that you have is the kind of thing that Leslie loves.
Okay.
She loves things that get going. She doesn't want a slow burn. She wants something that hits the ground running and keeps going.
Yeah.
And I'd say it's very much what this is. I think Leslie would really enjoy the fast pace.
Thank you. Yeah, well, my editor was certainly hammering that home a lot. She's very keen to keep the action moving all the time, So, yeah.
It works really well.
It's not always easy to do that, but you just have to kind of keep coming up with scenarios that will keep the story moving,
So is that your kind of top tip for that? That, as long as you keep the action going, it will keep the pace up? Or is there's more to it, I'm sure. You make it look really easy, and it's but for us mere mortals, I have no idea how you do that.
Yeah, I don't know. You see, I don't really analyze it that much, I just kind of, the scenes pop into my head and I kind of just join the dots, really, I suppose, in a way. But it's, yeah, and then your editor, obviously, when your initial structure allowed it, they'll kind of iron out all that kind of stuff for you as well, and point out where maybe the pace has dropped or you need to rewrite something. So it's kind of it's a team effort, with all of my books. I have to say, I've been really lucky. I've had the most amazing editors, both in Avon and now in Storm. So, and then when I was independently publishing, I had a fantastic editor. So, she was nearly more invested in my books than I was at times. You know, she could quote something from book one, and I'd be there scratching my head, saying, I don't remember that. You know, but yeah. So that's, you know, there's no magic formula to it. It's hard work. It's research. It's reading a lot, and I've been lucky in that. From a young age, I was reading a lot. You know, I was an only child, so I tended to escape with books. And my father encouraged me hugely. So, and he was big into history. So I think that kind of kicked it off, you know, in a way. So.
I must apologise. I was thinking of the wrong Leslie. There are two Leslies that are watching, and I was thinking of the other one, but Leslie Field is the one who said sounds right up your street. So Leslie, go and read it and let me know what you think. And more importantly, let Pam know what you think. Michelle Kidd is a big fan of yours. She loves your books.
Oh, and ditto. I love hers.
Her books are brilliant as well.
Yeah, a big fan of Jack.
Absolutely love Jack. Helen Blenkinsop, hi Helen, who writes as A. Abbott as well. Fascinating to hear about the Blitz. I think I remember police phone boxes. I'm sure our local Bobby had a blue light outside his house too. Now that I hadn't heard of.
Yes, yeah, probably.
So that's interesting. So there must have been a lot of things that you came across in your research so you weren't aware of the phone boxes, the police phone boxes. Other things that kind of came up while you were researching?
Oh yeah, I suppose there was one thing that was going back to the original, the Dobkin murder, which was kind of my inspiration. The pathologist who worked on that particular murder, and his name, of course, has totally escaped me. But that Dobkin case was the very first case in the UK where dental records were used to identify a victim. Because in that particular case, the body had been buried in a burnt out church for about a year. So you can imagine the state of the remains. So he also reconstructed her face using her skull. And I think that also was the first time that was ever done. So that was quite fascinating. And a lady who worked for him wrote a book. Again, it's gone from my head, but it was really, really interesting about his career. She wrote, kind of like a memoir, really, but his career in forensics, which was really, really interesting. So
I'm going to go back to what you said about it being a team effort, and then just to prepare you, that's when I'm going to ask you to do your reading that you very kindly offered to do for us. I do love it when authors like to read parts of their own books. I love that. But going back to the team effort, you're saying your time with your publisher now, you've got kind of a really good team around you again.
yeah.
So what kind of, for any of the readers who aren't really familiar with the publishing industry, what does that kind of entail for you?
Well, I suppose it's so many different pairs of eyes on your work. You know, when you're independently published, you probably have an editor and maybe you have beta readers or whatever. But when you're with a traditional house, they usually contract out the various different edits. So there's one person does line editing, another does copy editing, and then you have a professional proofreader as well. So for me, it just feels like the books are more polished, you know, because there's so many different people looking at it. You know, in fact, the previous book with Avon, which is The Last Letter from London, I'd made a mistake, and it was actually the copy editor who spotted it. My own editor didn't see it. I didn't see it. No matter how many times I'd read it. You know, and you read those books so many times when you're editing that process, you get to the point where you just want to throw it away. You get really sick of it. But yeah, and that was quite close to the end of the editing process, and she discovered it. So I just think it's vital. And anyone who says you don't need an editor is just crazy. I just don't understand it.
The thing is, when you're looking at your own thing, your brain's going to read it the way that it thinks you've done it. So you're not always going to see it. So a fresh pair of eyes whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pairs of eyes, at least one is always a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you ready to
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the little bit I'm going to read is from the first chapter in the book. So just to give you context, Madeline was in her kitchen. She knew the bombing would be starting shortly because it had happened every night since September. But she was desperately trying to get a Christmas pudding finished because her children were coming back. They were evacuated when the Blitz started. But unfortunately, the Luftwaffe came a little bit early. The warning was late, and she's kind of there conflicted. Do I leave the pudding or do I whatever? So anyway, she makes the wrong decision. The bomb drops the back of her house and she ends up in the rubble. So I'll start from there. Some while later, she drifted back to consciousness and heard a noise, as if someone were scrambling over rubble, then a muttered curse. It seemed to come from the back garden. Who could it be? Rescue services or a neighbour, perhaps? Dare she hope? She tried to move, but she was stuck firm. That was odd. The pain had diminished. But then she realised all the feeling below her waist was gone. Madeline heard a bang. It sounded like falling masonry, and it was close. Would the upstairs of the house fall on her at any moment? Once more she prayed, please, please, someone help me. Surely rescuers must be here by now. Straining, she peered out beyond the house. To her surprise, now that the dust had settled, she could make out the stumps of trees at the bottom of the garden, silhouetted against an angry orange sky. London was burning again. God, this is hopeless, she thought, as despair threatened to overpower her once more. It was then she spotted the beam of a torch flickering over the kitchen wall. She struggled to find the source, then sighed with relief as a dark shape appeared near the house. Help, she croaked. Over here, I'm trapped in the kitchen. The figure took on human form, and Madeline breathed more easily. As her rescuer drew closer, Madeline cried out, Oh, thank God it's you. Hurry up, I'm under the table. Can you get me out? The beam of the torch hit her face. Madeline shielded her eyes with a shaky hand. But the person hesitated, standing where the rear wall of the house used to be, and played the light around the remnants of her kitchen. Hurry up, Madeline cried. Despite that, her rescuer stood at the boundary. Were they afraid the building was unsafe? Madeline's panic grew. Please. With a grunt, the rescuer clambered over the wreckage and dropped to their knees beside the table. They peered in at her, but their expression, half in light and half in shadow, was impossible to read. What were they waiting for? Please, I'm in so much pain, Madeline said, as at last they put down the torch and removed a few pieces of rubble. I'm sorry for all of it. Suddenly, to Madeline's consternation, their hand froze, and they stared at her, sitting back on their hunkers. After a hurried glance out to the garden, they smiled, a slow smile that turned Madeline's insides to ice. The torch was turned off, enveloping them in darkness. What are you doing? Madeline cried out as astonishment fought with fear. Her rescuer remained silent and unmoving. Madeline knew something wasn't right. Seconds later, Madeline gasped as hands grasped her throat and squeezed hard, forcing her into oblivion, this time for eternity. That's it.
That is so good. Leslie Field has just commented, I'm going to have in capital letters to buy this book. Yeah, yes you are, Leslie.
Thank you.
I know I've already read that, but there's something really special about you reading that to us.
Oh, thank you.
It's quite an emotional thing, I think, having the author read a book that you just love. You know, it's just, that was really lovely. Thank you for offering, because I probably wouldn't have asked, because, as I said, lots of people, I feel really emotional hearing that again. Lots of people are, you know, are not, they're a bit on the fence about doing readings, especially a recording that's going to, you know, maybe
Sure.
stay.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. You should be read. I mean, you've got a great audio book reader as well, a narrator.
Oh, I wish.
But yeah, you could be reading that. That was just gorgeous. So, okay, bring myself back now. We had a comment as well from Donna Morfitt. She's saying, "Now I'm wondering what I've missed. We'll be going to back to watch first bit later." Um, yeah, you should, Donna. You need to read this book. Helen was saying that was so tense. She said, "Wow, that was so tense." It really was. I could feel myself like leaning forward and forward, just drawn in. And I've already read this, but what a gripping opening! You must have had something. Did you? No spoilers. Did you know who that was with the hands around her throat when you wrote it? Did you already know the answer?
No,
No. That's
no, I'm a
brilliant.
pantser. So I don't, I mean, I'd have a very rough outline, but yeah, the murderer was actually someone else right up to,
Oh,
I think it was
okay.
2 chapters from the finish and I changed my mind and made it somebody else.
Oh. Um, Again, no spoilers. Did your editor know that you changed your mind before your editor read it? No.
So,
That's it. I'll be asking you afterwards who it originally was, because I'm intrigued, but don't say it while we're here. Do
okay.
not. Please don't give that away. Oh my word. Um, so Donna's again saying you've been on a radar for ages, but she needs to put you on the TBR. Yeah, yeah, you absolutely do. Let's talk about the previous 3 books that you've done with Avon.
Mm-hmm.
So, will there be? Is that a trilogy and done, or will there be more
No,
in that
that's,
series?
they're done. Yeah. Yeah, it was a funny thing because um, my agent was actually subbing my Victorian series. And this would have been 2018, 2019.
Hmm.
And we were just getting, oh, Victorian era is not really that popular. So, you know, my agent was kind of saying, well, would you not do World War II? Everybody's looking for World War II. And I was quite reluctant because I was trying to figure out what could I bring to it that would be different.
Hmm.
Um, so eventually I said, okay, I'll have a think about it. And the only thing that I could really come up with was, obviously, as I'm Irish, so I thought, well, what about an Irish perspective on World War II and the home front and all of that? So, yeah, so the first book is, well, let's see if we can see that, Her Secret War. Um, and again, funnily enough, it actually starts off with a bombing incident, as a coincidentally, but the particular bombing incident that's in this book actually happened. It had literally happened a couple of miles from where I grew up.
Right.
Um, and for years, I would have passed the site and it was all just hoarding and never knew what the story was. It was only when I was a teenager I actually discovered the history of it. So I decided to start my book with that particular incident. And my protagonist, obviously, she's Irish, working class girl, finds herself homeless, family killed in the bombing, and she goes to England to relatives to find work as well. And then she ends up eventually working for MI5. And so the 3 books really just take her from very naive Dublin girl to the third book where she's quite an accomplished spy, if you like, and ends up in Lisbon where all that kind of spy action happens during World War II.
I can't imagine anything I want to read more right now.
So yeah, they were the books, the other Avon books, and then I have obviously my Victorian series, which were independently published originally, and then Storm Publishing purchased the rights earlier this year. And the first three books came out, were republished the end of July with lovely new covers. So I don't know if you can see. That's the first book. And this is my favorite because this one is set in Egypt. So absolutely love that cover. So yeah, and we've a fourth new book in this series coming out in about 2 weeks' time. So really looking forward to that. So yeah, so again, they're murder mysteries, kind of probably more cozy, if you were to classify them than the other book. But yeah, I love that particular era. I'm just huge fan. So,
In the comments, Michelle Kidd is saying, "I love another pantser, but it works, Pam." Is this the way you've always written? Have you always just kind of
yeah,
sat down and got on with it?
yeah. My first book, which I don't know if you can see behind me, it's The Bow's Inheritance, just there, the woman on the front. That was my first book, and I probably wrote. I think I spent maybe 18 months writing that book because I was just enjoying it. Never thought I'd publish, and just had a good time writing it. So, yeah. And I'm a visual writer, if you know what I mean. I have to be able to see the scene and the characters before I can actually write it. So my first drafts are incredibly slow. Whereas Michelle Kidd, writing 6,000 words a day at the moment, I'm just, you know, really good writer, by the way. Anyone who hasn't read her books.
Oh, fabulous. Absolutely adore her. I'm intrigued, Michelle, you are watching, so did you hit your word count today? How far in are you today? I did see a post, but it was one of those things where you're looking and you read something, you think, right, I'll look at that again in a minute, and you look away and you look back and everything's refreshed.
Yeah.
And you forget to go and do it because there's 1,000 different writing posts to look at. You know, there's constantly something updating. Do you think that there's any? Do you think if you're a pantser, you're a pantser? If you're a plotter, you're a plotter?
Well, I suppose if I really thought about it, I'm probably somewhere in between now. But that's because once you have traditional contracts, you have deadlines and they're not movable, so you kind of have to get your act together. And yeah, so particularly with Avon, I would have the books were bought based on a one-page synopsis for a lot of them. So that was kind of it. It was a structure, and actually, it does help. It does help you write a little bit faster when you kind of have it laid out. But it doesn't come naturally, shall we say? It's yeah, and I don't tell anyone, but I do make changes. Yeah.
That's probably a good thing, though, isn't it? Because if you read it and you think, right, that needs something doing with it, then of course you're going to change it.
Yeah, and the characters themselves often, they're an obstreperous lot. They'll always make up something along the way that you have to change. So yeah.
We've got some comments here. So Michelle did hit another 6,000 words today. She's now spent. And Leslie Field is saying to me, Sam, I know which Leslie you mean. We do like the same books. So Leslie Field, you need to start reading them because you will love this. If you like the same as Leslie Lloyd, you will love this book. Absolutely. So you're one of the other things that I noticed, we were talking about your teen earlier, so I'm losing my ears. And one of the things you have is kind of a tight knit group, not group knit, of author friends. You do have people that you can kind of get in touch with. You can talk about the books. You can, just talk about anything other than the books when you're having a day and you're fed up of it, and kind of all of the in between. That must be a really important thing. I can't imagine doing this kind of work without some sort of support.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's such a solitary profession. You're stuck in it. Well, I shouldn't say stuck. I'm very lucky to have an office. But yeah, sometimes it can kind of feel a bit lonely. And I mean, I'd come from up to a couple of years ago, I was working in an office, doing an office job in a bit on a part of a big team. So I really do miss that interaction on a daily basis. So, but I'm really lucky. I've met some really great friends, Valerie Keogh, Jenny O'Brien in particular. They're Irish authors as well, so we're kind of a bit cliquey. But yeah, the HNS, Historical Novel Society, Crime Writers Association, there's often chapter meetings, and I do make an effort to go to those. And there's other authors, I would be friends with authors in other genres as well. It's not just crime or historical, but it's great, and going to conferences, stuff like that. I think it's really important that you get out and meet other authors. Yeah, even if it's just to moan at each other. It's good.
All necessary. A good vent is one of the best things about having friends.
Absolutely.
Especially friends who know.
Pardon? Sorry?
Especially the ones who know.
Yes.
Donna's asking, am I on the beer or something stronger? There is lager in my mug. I don't drink anything stronger. I drink very, very weak lager, that's it. I'm not a young thing anymore like you, Donna. I'm about 2 years older than her, but still. I don't drink gin and spirits, I can't. Very weak lager, that's it. It's generally a shandy as well. So I want to go back to, has it been more difficult trying to set this during the Blitz? We talked a bit about the police procedural side before, but on the flip side to that, there must be so many other elements that, because it's not a straight police procedural as such, even though it is, you've got all of these different elements of the other side to consider. So you've got all of the things that we maybe wouldn't consider about day-to-day life in the Blitz. We think about maybe blackout blinds and, don't have your fire lit because there might be smoke and all of this Blitz spirit. But what that really boils down to on a day-to-day basis, you get that. You have worked hard at showing what day-to-day life is like.
Yeah, no, I did try to, like my mother and her sisters actually left Ireland. They were living in the west of Ireland. There were no jobs. It was really poor. And to my utter amazement, whenever me or my cousins would ask them, why did you go from safe, neutral Ireland to England? Bombs and they would say the excitement, and I'd be just going, really? The excitement. So my mum actually ended up well, they all did. They all ended up in Birmingham. My mum was a clippy on the buses. My aunt worked in a munitions factory in Birmingham, and my other aunt trained as a nurse. So I had their stories as well, and I suppose particularly with the Sarah Gillespie, the Secret War series, there's a lot of their history kind of hidden in that. It's not blatantly their story or anything like that, but I've used incidents that happened to, say, my mum. She had a stalker, so I used that in one of the books as well, and just little things like that. And then when I was researching for Under a Lightning Sky, I was reading a lot about criminal activity. So there was a huge amount of gang warfare going on at the time. So I do include a little bit of that in the story. And certainly if I write a sequel, I think that'll feature even more. But yeah, so it was fascinating. I mean, we all have this kind of rose-tinted kind of Blitz spirit thing, but actually there was an awful lot of horrible stuff going on. Criminals were just taking advantage of blackout, as you can imagine, looting shops and everything, so it was black marketeering and shortages of food and all of that. So you can imagine it's human nature. They're going to get up to mischief. So I tried to...
Sorry, go on.
I was trying to incorporate that, and then my female protagonist, she's a volunteer firefighter. Again, I was trying to show what that might have been like. So yeah, it was very interesting stuff. So I tried to include things that would give it an authentic kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, I think there's something about the the progression of women. You know, I mean, Penny wouldn't have been allowed to be a volunteer firefighter generally, and going back to normal life as such as it was, you know, after that, that's quite. I can't imagine being a woman then and suddenly being allowed to do things because the men weren't there to do it, and proving that you could not only do the job, but you could do it just as well and quite often better, you know, because you kind of seeing this opportunity and throwing everything at it. And then having to go back home. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being a woman, a stay-at-home mum, you know, or, you know, a married woman looking after your husband, if that's what you want. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if that is not your thing and you're then forced back into normality afterwards, that must have been quite despairing research, I would imagine, in some ways.
Yeah, and it was history repeating itself. I mean, World War One was exactly the same, you know, possibly worse in that, you know, it was really apparent for a woman to want to work. It was just, oh my God, you know, and all these soldiers
Yeah,
coming back, and the women have taken our jobs, and you know, yeah, it was pretty. But I suppose it did help them get the vote eventually. So you know, silver lining.
absolutely. And the idea of, I mean, we're going back to the criminals. There is right near the beginning, so no spoiler. There is the raid, the second raid, I believe it was, of a jewellery store. And there's a really nice scene that you've written where I can kind of picture the glass, the broken glass on the floor, and you're wondering if it's the diamonds or if it's the glass, and all the empty display cases and all of that. And it's really, like you were saying, you're a visual writer, it's a very vivid scene, so that really comes across. But the idea of your country's being bombed, so what do? You go and loot, you go and rob people. It's just, it adds so much to the book, but the reality of that is just disgraceful.
Yeah, no, I was actually quite shocked when I read about it. You know, they were doing all these smash and grab raids. Initially, they were doing it in daylight, so they'd literally
Mm,
drive a car, ram it into the shop window, and grab. But then, obviously, when blackout was introduced, they didn't need to do that anymore because they had blackout to cover what they were up to. So, you know, again, I tried to use that, you know, just to give it a more authentic feel. Yeah.
were there any things that we maybe wouldn't know as well for during the blackouts, the kind of things that were happening? But once the air raid, I mean, we've got all of the kind of, you know, the jewellery stores being robbed, and we have a murder, and we have different things happening throughout the book. But was there a time when you were researching when you found out something that surprised you about, you know, you've got the air raid siren, you need to make sure your blackout blinds are closed by a certain time. You know, we're not going to have the fire burning because there might be smoke. You're not going to have the kids playing out. You know, the ones that didn't leave are going to be hidden from view. Was there anything that really kind of surprised you as you were researching that? Because we all have an idea of the things that we think the blackouts
Yeah.
might have been like in the Blitz, but there must be so much more depth as well to it.
Yeah. I don't think there was anything that really surprised me, but it made me think about what was it like to live through that every night. The Luftwaffe were
Mm,
coming, you knew they were coming, and yet normal life had to continue. Like simple thing like making your Christmas pudding, you know, or buying the children's presents and hiding them in the house. You know, it's
yeah.
yeah. So not surprising, but yeah, it was kind of it made you think.
Yeah, which I suppose is kind of surprising in its own way, because when you really think about the kind of just how awful it must have been, you know, we're not all having the easiest of times the last few years, but, and we're not comparing one thing with another, obviously, not happening, but different periods of time lend themselves to crime writing in just such a unique way.
That's
You
true.
know, so yeah, back in the Blitz, you've got all the different things. Then, if you're writing something during the pandemic, you know, there'd be certain things that were, you know,
Yeah.
comparable with that time. So where are you going next?
Where am I going next? Um, well, there's possibly going to be another Victorian book, maybe next year. I've actually started a contemporary Irish crime novel as well.
Ooh.
And it's featuring a female private investigator. So very early stages. And I haven't even told my agent yet. So,
Do I need to stop you there? Is this where I cut you off?
maybe you should. But for me, it's I just love the challenge. So for me, I did the espionage books, and then I wanted something different, so I went police procedural. So this contemporary book, obviously, it's a completely new thing for me. So, but I'm really enjoying it. So I think maybe it's I'll still probably juggle historical and contemporary, but I just want to challenge myself. It's life's too short not to. So.
What are the biggest differences when you're writing contemporary versus historical? There must be certain things that you have in your mind when you're writing one versus the other.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, historical. Obviously, you have to double check absolutely everything. But I'm lucky in that I love the research, so it's never really been, and it's part of the enjoyment for me. Whereas contemporary, I suppose, and particularly because I'm writing an Irish crime novel, I have to be very aware of police procedures here as opposed to the UK, which the other books would have been. So that is a bit of a challenge for me. But I'm very lucky. I have a friend who's a retired, they're called the Gardaí here. So he's a retired policeman, and he's been very good in the past. Even when I did, it was never published, but I wrote a Victorian Dublin murder mystery, and he actually read it for me and gave me advice. So I think I'll be calling on him again. So yeah, it's different, but there's still a huge amount of research. I mean, obviously, your readers deserve that. You need to. It needs to be as authentic as you can make it, and your characters need to be as authentic as you can make them. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but if it's worth doing, you do it well, as my mum used to always say.
Absolutely. Kaz has said hello as well. I really, you've read a little bit from the opening scene, and the more I think, about the rest of the story. How much can we really discuss without spoilers? It's quite tricky.
Yeah, probably not.
I don't want to give anything away, and obviously I won't give anything away. We can talk a little bit about the timeline jumping from time to time. So for example, right at the beginning, we've got we're on the kind of mid to late December, and then you go back
around the 19th or 20th of December. Yeah, it's just before.
And then you go back to about the 11th.
Yeah.
And then look from there.
Yeah.
I really liked that. I really like that thing of you've put this, and then you jump straight back, and you think, oh, okay, why have we jumped straight back? What was it that made you think that? That was how you wanted to write it in that order, that structure.
Yeah. I don't know that I really thought about it that much. It just seemed to be the natural way to tell the story, because I wanted, I suppose, I have to admit, maybe to shock my reader a little bit in that first chapter. So they right up to the last paragraph, they think, oh, somebody's going to rescue her. She's going to be okay. And then obviously she's strangled. So, but then I kind of felt, well, yeah, we need a little bit of the backstory now, so that this all the loose ends kind of tie together nice and neatly as the story goes. But what also appealed to me actually was the fact that the crime scene, the murder isn't discovered until a few days. I think it's Christmas Eve or Christmas Day that the pathologist discovered. So in that time, rescue crews have been into the house, and practically all the evidence, any evidence, is gone. So my detective is really in the dark. You know, he has to pull clues from wherever he can find them, and that's where the victim's sister kind of comes into the story. She kind of feeds a little bit of information there now and again to him. So yeah, it was, yeah, it's, I suppose a lot of crime books will start with the murder in the first chapter, and you know, I just thought it kind of fitted the story the way I wanted to tell it.
Did you cackle with glee when you realised that you're going to have Madeline in a bombed house? She's going to be murdered, and it's really not going to be obvious. You know, initially, it's not going to be obvious until they literally dig deeper that you've made it the hardest crime scene. It is a
Yeah,
genius thing to
I
do.
know, and it was difficult enough. I mean, they didn't have DNA, they didn't have forensics, really, very little. They okay,
Now they've not really got a crime scene.
yeah, no CCTV,
Nope.
and that's part of the thing that appeals to me actually about historical crime is that it's down to intellectual power as opposed to forensics that will usually solve your crime. So yeah, and it makes it more challenging to write, obviously, but that's what I enjoy. So,
Is this one of the things that you went back and changed as you went along?
which that changed.
Just anything that was kind of as you writing along, you kind of thinking, well, we've done this and we've done this, and then I've completely removed the crime scene. I must have to put something in there
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah,
So did you have to kind of add that as you went along because you've not got kind of a you've not plotted it out, you've no kind of plan for it?
yeah. No, yeah, obviously, yeah. There were things. Trying to think now. What can I tell you that won't spoil it? Oh yeah. So when the rescue, or not, the cleanup crews were in the house, they discovered some personal items and gave them to the family. And then the sister finds something within those personal
Okay.
belongings that becomes a clue and helps the detectives zone in on. Now it's not the right person, but the red herring person. So yeah, that kind of came as I wrote it. You know, I wouldn't have initially had that idea, but yeah, it just.
You were talking about kind of how you're thinking as you go along, and you quite visual. See, it's how you make the scenes work. There's a question that I've asked a lot of people over the years, but I've not asked for a while. Did you feel the need to act any of the scenes out to check that, you know, hand placement or whatever it is was in the right place? We've had some authors who will read the dialogue aloud to check that it works, and we've had authors do all kinds of crazy things. We had Kat Yaff had her husband tie her to a chair so she could see if she could escape. Anne Coates held a knife up to her own throat just to see what that was like for one of her Hannah Weybridge novels. We had Mark Richards, who used to write novels set in Whitby, and him and his son acted out a fight scene on Whitby Pier to make sure that it would work properly. Have you gone outside and made your neighbours think you're crazy in some way or another?
I think they already think I'm crazy, so it wouldn't make much difference. No, I haven't done anything like that, but I would probably. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, the dialogue
Mm.
happens in my head. And then I'm too lazy to get up and write it down, so kind of have to hope I remember it in the morning. Um, yeah, I suppose there was one scene actually in my very first book, where my heroine, I'm going to tell this without giving it away too much, but she's been grabbed and she's in, I suppose, what you nearly call a fireman's hole. So she's kind of over somebody's shoulder.
Mm.
And I needed her to reach down into that person's pocket and pull out a gun. So, yeah, there was a lot of thought went into that one. And it was at the end, on the shore as well. So this person was wading into the water with her on his shoulder, and I had to, yeah. So.
I'm assuming you didn't get on somebody's shoulder and wade
No, I
in.
didn't. But I had to really think about it. I mean, could you actually, yeah. So hopefully it's
I like that. That's going in my favourite answers to the question list.
good.
Even more so if you'd have actually been on somebody's shoulder wading.
Yeah, I should have said I was. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Next time somebody asks.
Next time,
We are almost out of time.
Oh gosh.
That has really flown, Pam. Thank you so much.
Sam.
Could you please give everybody a reminder of the books?
Oh, right.
Just go and see what everyone. Donna Morfitt, pay attention. Under a Lightning Sky.
Pay attention. So, Under a Lightning Sky, standalone murder mystery. And then I have my Victorian series. This is the first book in that series, which is it's set in London and Yorkshire. And second book is Egypt. Third book is London and Scotland. And the fourth book, which is coming out in 2 weeks' time, is set on Lake Como, because I love Lake Como. So, and then I have my espionage series, which is her Secret War series. So there's 3 books in that, and it's an Irish protagonist working for MI5. So that's it.
And you've just reminded me of something. We spoke before we went live about books you've read recently, and there was something that you had enjoyed and you made a note of it because you were very wise. So what was the book that you were talking about?
So last weekend I was very lucky. It's actually been a hectic couple of months, and I haven't been doing any reading. So it was lovely. And again, it was the Italy magnet for me. So
that's what reminded me.
Yes, yeah. So Simon McLeod's book, his newest, is The Last Night at Villa Lucia. So I read that over the weekend. Very, very, very good. Highly recommend. So, and actually, here's a funny one. A lot of people don't know about MRC Cassasian. I absolutely love his books, particularly his Victorian series. So for anyone who likes historical, I highly recommend his books. Absolutely.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you everyone who's watched tonight and asked questions, and Morfitt taking the mickey out of me as usual, sounds about right. But Donna has a really lovely comment. This has been fab. Pam, you've jumped up the TBR. As a random aside, you're also very beautiful. Thanks, ladies. And she's not wrong.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we've got a comment from Helen Blenkinsop has said thank you to us both, a thoroughly entertaining hour. Tony Millington has said buried pigs and husbands tied up in bin bags. Now this is going back to has anyone acted something out?
Yeah.
Kate Bendelow had a husband in the back garden wrapped in bin bags with his arm sticking out for a scene in one of her books. It's not The Real CSI. The name escapes me at the moment, but Kate Bendelow, one of her books, and the buried pigs was Jane Isaac buried a pig shoulder in her back garden as part of research for a book to see if things buried in concrete would hold their state. And what she didn't realise, as she dug it up on a hot day with all the neighbours having barbecues around her, is the decomposition when the oxygen hits. She had to very quickly dig up a very smelly bit of pig shoulder in the garden, surrounded by all the neighbours who I'm sure were probably fuming, or they got a nice funny story to dine out on. I don't know. I tried telling different stories, but somebody always brings one of those up. Thank you so much. Will you come back and talk to us about the next book?
Oh, yes, I'd love to. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pam. What a great hour.
Thank you.
And we are done. We are